10th in Columbus.
Oh, okay. That should be good. Yeah. Please, don't share a and the gallery's packed.
There's a lot of those.
Oh, well.
Okay, I will call to order this meeting of the Altoona Government Study Commission for Monday, July 1. Note the time is 7 o'clock p.m. The meeting will begin with a moment of silent meditation, and that will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I guess I will ask what I'm hoping will be our soon-to-be appointed stenographer, Linda Schellhammer, to please call the roll.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Eccles? Here. Mr. Flan?
Here.
Ms. Green?
Here.
Mr. Kutz?
Here.
Vice Chairman Fiore?
Here.
And Chairman Hippo?
Here. The next item on the agenda is all public comment. Any member of the public wishing to offer comment? Note, please, for the minutes there are none. Next item on the agenda is the formal appointment of Linda Schellhammer as the official stenographer of this body, and Kim Carreri to serve as alternate. We had this discussion last time.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of that appointment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, and please pass our thank you as well on to Kim. Thank you, Lynn. Joe Weekland had circulated the minutes of the organizational meeting of June 17, 2013, last week by electronic mail. Does anyone, I'll entertain a motion that we adopt those as the official minutes of that meeting.
So moved.
Do we have a second, Mr. Flair? Any discussion regarding minutes? Hearing no discussion, I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The next opportunity is our main event. I'm sorry?
May I ask a question before we begin the presentation? Would it be possible to establish time frames for presentations and expectations for the meeting itself?
Meeting for tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've already informed our visitor that we have a general time frame. I think he's hoping to do 45 minutes to an hour. You said an hour.
No more than 1 hour for my part, if not less.
Okay.
Excuse me.
We're still hoping to be done well in advance of our time now.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, I made certain you started exactly.
I know you did. Congratulations.
We're fortunate enough tonight to have a representative from DCED here. Mr. Kutz was extremely helpful in helping to get this moving, and Bob, thank you for that. Michael Foreman has generously agreed to come in. I'll let him tell you about his background, and then he's going to do the overview and answer some of the questions. And you were explaining on the phone you were okay. Tell me how you want to handle questions from the commission. Save it for the end or interrupt?
I can take them during my presentation. I can wait till the end. It's at your pleasure. So depending on how pressing you feel the question is, whether you want some level of clarification.
Very good. So I'll turn it over to you, and thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation and the request to be here tonight. the narrative that I'm giving you regarding the part when you start looking at the handout beyond the flow chart. Okay? That's more FYI, as opposed to me going through that part myself with you tonight. By way of introduction, again, Michael Foreman with the Governor's Center for Local Government Services. We're an office within the Department of Community and Economic Development, an executive agency under the jurisdiction of the governor. And my main role with the center is really to provide technical assistance to local governments on a regular basis. I normally work out of the Southwest Regional Office, and I work with financially challenged communities and early intervention communities, and I also provide training and also hands-on technical assistance with local government officials appointed and or elected per se. I've served as an Act 47 coordinator in various municipalities. I currently serve as the City of Clareton Distress Community Coordinator in the Borough of Franklin next to Johnstown. I've also served with Braddock and Rankin in the Borough of Wilkinsburg as well. And I'm working with several early intervention communities in southwestern Pennsylvania, which are financially challenged communities that we'd like to keep from going into the Act 47 program. The training that I provide really is budgeting training, budget development and management, training with elected auditors. Believe it or not, there are elected auditors for townships and boroughs, municipal secretaries and administrators, real estate tax collection training. I helped go out and do training regarding the Act 32 consolidated earned income tax collection that you now have a in-house bureau for regarding Blair County. I also do newly elected officials training through the various municipal associations when we have municipal elections such as this year. We're starting to do later in January coming up. And I also do municipal township conventions and borough conventions on a countywide basis on special topics. So one of the topics that I'm here tonight to talk about, in fact the topic is home rule as it pertains to the Altoona Government Study Commission. This is one of the technical assistance menu items that we talk about from time to time. And I've worked with different government study commissions from time to time over my 20 plus years working with the department in the various counties throughout western Pennsylvania. So I'm glad to be here, by invitation and by request of the chair tonight. So why don't we kind of just start with the overview. And I know that you've already gotten your hands wet or your feet wet, whatever, you jumped into the pool already, with an overview of the role of the Government Study Commission with Solicitor Clapper. So I'm not going to go over that tonight, but I just want to kind of give you an overview of the process. So why don't we start by looking at the first provision dealing with home rule, which is an excerpt from the Pennsylvania Constitution, that municipalities have the right, if they so choose, to basically frame and to adopt and to amend and repeal, if so be, through the power of the referendum, power of the ballot box, to adopt home rule charters, which in essence, semantically, is really your local constitution. So this is really what you're here to address over a multi-month period. And we'll get into that time frame momentarily. So you really have the ability to, through a home rule charter, to exercise any power or perform any function really that's not denied by the federal or state constitutions, by any general statute of Pennsylvania, or by your own home rule charter, or by any ordinance you have adopted. So that really is the opposite of really what you're under right now, which is known as Dillon's Rule. This is just a quick civics class in local government in Pennsylvania. Dillon's Rule basically says that local governments may only exercise those powers or exercise the authority that you have that is expressly stated in words, in statute, in the in terms of what the General Assembly adopts in your third-class city code or in the third-class city optional plan, in express words, or that is incidentally implied in that express direct authority in statute adopted by the General Assembly. So that is what the municipalities exercise in terms of their authority or power that are not home rule. That they stick basically to their municipal code, third-class city code, borough code, second-class township, first-class township codes. But when you go home rule, flip that over, because you can exercise any power that's not prohibited by the federal or state constitutions, by general laws, and by your own home rule charter or by your own ordinances. So you're really dealing with some latitude and some flexibility here. So in terms of the time frame that you are going through your charge, so to speak, I'm assuming that this took place in the May 21 primary. You have a final report that we can, at least I'll insert in the more lengthy narrative that I'm not going to go through tonight, that you, at least within the first 9 months, if you choose no change, you still have to do a final report of your proceedings. If you go the full 18 months, you still do a final report that you'll turn over to the city clerk, who will then certify and then turn over to the county election office to put on the ballot for a referendum question. And here's the date that you'll decide whether no change or home rule charter, no later than next February, or if you go the route of developing a home rule charter, no later than November 2014, will that be put on the ballot to go your full 18 months. But if you choose to go by district election, then you have an additional 60 days that will take you into mid-Jan 2015. So then that would put you into the May 2015 primary, if that is the date that you want to place this on the ballot. You may amend the final report up to 60 days prior to the time you choose to put this home rule charter referendum question on the ballot. The implementation depends on when you so choose to implement, should this be passed, and that would be in your final report that I just mentioned a couple bullets up. So let's go into the home rule basics. So, as I indicated about your basic authority, should you become a home rule municipality, it's transferred from your third-class city code, third-class city optional plan that you're now operating under, council manager, with the mayor being the presiding officer, the rest of the members of council all having an equal vote. Your existing organizational structure is set forth by the General Assembly in your third-class city code. Go back a little further in that code, and you have the third-class city optional plan provision to a local charter, a local constitution, adopted and amended by the voters. This is where you have the people who speak, rather than the General Assembly in Harrisburg. That's why it's called home rule. Local power, more autonomy. Under the state code, the third-class city code, you can only do what is permitted by law, referencing Dillon's rule. You can only exercise those powers and exercise that authority which is expressly stated in words in statute. What is permitted by law? But under home rule, you can do anything that's not prohibited. So again, you're looking at two sides of the coin here. Right now you're looking at the head of Lincoln rather than Lincoln Memorial on the flip side, so to speak, of the penny. Let's look at historic reasons for home rule. You know what? Do you mind if I have some extra handouts for the audience? Do you mind if, I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I am sorry. I think I've got two more. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You can share. Feel free to make copies. I apologize. Sometimes what's right in front of me I miss, you know. Sorry. All right, we're on historic reasons for home rule. Okay, so when you talk about home rule, being a home rule municipality gives you residual powers. And those powers exist because you are in home rule municipalities, because you're exercising those powers that are not prohibited. And what do we mean by residual powers? Well, you can write your own administrative code. That is really codifying the powers that are given to you under a home rule charter. And a home rule charter is really kind of a skeleton or a framework or just the basic power and authority that a home rule municipality may exercise or that you may carry out. But the administrative code is the meat. It's the substance. It's giving meaning to the words that are in the charter. So the administrative code is a companion document. It's really a codification of the charter itself. So really, what are we talking about? We're giving substance to the power and the duties and the responsibilities of the administrative people, the management people, and it's also spelling out maybe could be a code of ethics, a conflict of interest policy, a personnel policy, a purchasing policy, financial policies, and other policies under which the home rule charter would operate. So it's really a few inches thick, if you were to kind of envision what this is. Look at what your codification of ordinances are now. This is really an analogous document in terms of a home rule charter, and then you would adopt by ordinance your administrative code, which again gives meaning and substance to the home rule charter, which really is, again, the basic framework and skeleton of what the powers are that you as elected officials and the appointed people and your employees may exercise. Increase citizen access through initiative and referendum. What does that mean? That means through initiative, people circulating petitions, or through referendum, power of the ballot box, citizens could submit petitions to the governing body of a home rule community, and if they meet a certain threshold of signatures on a relevant issue, that would then require the governing body to adopt an ordinance to either adopt the policy or place a question on a referendum to then implement it and make it part of the home rule charter. Or you have improved accountability and responsiveness. What does that mean? That means, in terms of accountability, the charter, the administrative code, would clearly and explicitly spell out the powers and the duties and the responsibilities of the elected officials, but mainly the appointed officials. It would more clearly spell out the powers and the duties of the manager, the institutionalized position of manager, the institutionalized position of a finance director, it could be a director of personnel, and all of the department heads that right now in the optional third-class city plan really are not spelled out very explicitly or elaborately, but could be more clearly spelled out in that administrative code. So home rule does provide for more accountability in terms of what is clearly more in writing that you can point your finger to say, these are your powers, these are your duties, these are your responsibilities within the organizational structure that you are to carry out. And responsiveness would be from the public side, seeing what they are and making the governing body and the employees more accountable, but also requiring public hearings before maybe the governing body takes certain actions with respect to adopting certain policies and procedures, agendas for each meeting, public hearings again before certain issues are dealt with by the governing body. Then we have improved fiscal procedures and controls. These would deal with budget procedures per se. But right now there's nothing in your third-class city code or optional plan to talk about having a budget message, a budget calendar, when do you begin the budget process. All it says is that you begin the budget December 1st, and you have to have it adopted by the end of the year, a balanced budget. But in reality, the budget process starts much earlier in terms of timing, team effort, communication with the elected and appointed officials, presenting the budget, public hearings on the budget, and final adoption, the procedure to introduce the ordinance. You have to wait a period of time before you can then have the first reading, then the second reading for final adoption. These can be streamlined procedures to save money on legal advertising. In terms of controls, you can put into play controls in terms of the managerial responsibilities with respect to spending money where there's checks and balances between elected officials, and up until a certain threshold, for example, monies can be spent without maybe going to the governing body for approval, having centralized purchasing policies, where all departmental spending goes to the finance officer through a routine purchasing program, through purchasing policies. You have, as well, checks and balances with respect to requiring signatures when it comes to overall spending. And this would also include capital improvement program, where right now, the existing third-class city optional plan, I think, says very little about a capital improvement program. And this would be ongoing. Now, flexibility, what are we talking about flexibility? This could be dealing with taxes, or under home rule, you have the ability to emancipate yourselves from the caps for real estate and earned income and the transfer tax for residents, unlike what you have now. The rates that you have now would either be for Act 47 rates, where you need court approval, or for your pensions. But under Act 62, which is the act number for home rule, you can increase rates if the governing body so chooses, and if the home rule charter is silent on caps, and I'll get into caps in a minute, you can raise the rates through governing body action on residents. Now, you can have an interplay between raising rates on earned income and then commensurately reducing rates on real estate. And as you know, wage earners pay earned income taxes. Senior citizens don't, who are on fixed income, on pensions. And this does not necessarily pertain to interest earnings or dividend income like it does at the state level. It's earned income, it's not personal income at the municipal level. So you have that ability to tax those based upon an ability to pay earning wages versus homeowners who pay real estate taxes based on a fixed value of a piece of property. And again, on the transfer tax, again, that is paid normally by a resident when a property is transferred. But the home rule law basically says that you cannot tax non-residents above the rates that are currently in place, which under Act 511 of 1965 is 1%, which is what is in play right now under your current ordinance, where you're taxing non-residents that maybe work here, that live somewhere else, that maybe don't have an earned income tax per se. Rare, but it does happen. Now the caps, there are some home rule charters that do have caps on rates, but they say you can only go up a certain percent per year. Or it can only go up a certain rate amount each year.
No, just so I understand, you're saying 511 is one of the prohibited taxes under home rule?
Act 511 right now only allows your rate to be 0.5%. The other half, the other 0.5% goes to the school district unless they have a referendum that allows you, the taxpayer, to pay more than the inflationary index.
But that 511, whether you're home rule or optional, that's a state statute.
Act 511 of 1965 is a state statute, and that includes the Act 32 of 2009 as well. But what I'm saying about the earned income tax rate is that if you go home rule, and there's no language in the home rule charter putting a cap on your earned income tax rate, then you can go above the 0.5% rate. That you're under now.
The 1% that they're currently charging to non-residents who are employees, is that prohibited?
That is prohibited under home rule.
No, we were 1.2%.
Well, you're under Act 5, that's probably under Act 47. See, what that includes is the school district rate.
I'm mixing up two of my mind while you're right. It is an additional 0.2.
Yeah, it's 1.2%, it's not 1.
Well, then we're probably dealing with the pension levy as well.
How
do they do it in Pittsburgh? It's a much higher rate there, and
Right, Pittsburgh's a total rate of 3%, and 1.75 is the city rate, and 1.25 is the school district rate.
are they under home rule?
Yes, yes. And they have no Act 47 earned income tax
And
rates.
they do charge for those that work in and out of the city.
1%, just like you do right now.
Okay.
But under home rule, they're not allowed to go beyond 1%.
Right.
Just like if you went home rule, you cannot go above 1% on non-residents.
Okay.
But you're under Act 47 and you have a higher earned income tax rate under Act 47 on non-residents. Just like you have a higher rate on residents under Act 47 also, just as you do for a pension levy. So I just want to make sure you're clear on that. Under home rule, you can increase your rates under home rule above the rates you're at now, but not for non-residents, not for non-residents, okay? And the issue of a pension levy under home rule, that may not be available if you go home rule on non-residents. That needs to be clarified. I need to state that at this juncture as well. Okay,
The pension levy for residents,
for non-residents.
no, but for residents, is there?
That, I believe, may not be an option either. If you have a earned income tax rate that is uncapped, that needs to be explored with the Pennsylvania Employee Retirement Commission, which is the state agency that deals with Act 205 of 1984, which deals with the Municipal Employee Pension Plan Standard and Recovery Act, which deals with municipal pension plan administration and tax rates. Because you're a distressed pension plan, you have that ability now to do that. But under home rule, if you have extra taxing power and uncapped earned income taxing power, because your home rule, that option may be taken away.
Are you inferring that if we put a cap on earned income, then you can't have that?
You may be able to retain it if you put a cap on the earned income tax under home rule. I would clarify that with the Pennsylvania Employee Retirement Commission.
Since we broke the lid here on that question, just to back up a little bit, through each of these bullet points, you mentioned a lot of options. Were they a combination of options that could happen either under the administrative code that would potentially be written later, or all those options would be written into our home rule charter, or any combination thereof?
Well, if you make any change to the home rule charter, once it's adopted, it would have to be by referendum.
Correct.
If you make any changes to the administrative code, it would be an ordinance adoption that city council would adopt.
But any of those flexibilities or choices or options, if we choose to go home rule charter, we would have the option either to write them hard into the home rule charter or allow them for later to be implemented in the administrative code.
It depends on what you're referring to. Can you be more
Okay.
specific?
Take the budgeting process.
Yeah.
For instance, if we identified specific timeframes and expectations for budgeting, would it be in the charter or the administrative code?
It may depend on whether you're writing into the budget process something completely new, or whether it's really just refining something that already exists, a power or an authority that already exists in the home rule charter. Whether or not you're really just elaborating on it, that would just be an amendment to the administrative code. But if you're adding a new power or new authority that the city council is exercising or giving to an administrative appointee, that may be an amendment to the charter.
So, but we don't have a charter.
But if you had
What
one,
if we wrote it? And what about also the taxes and caps and things that you mentioned? You could either leave it uncapped, or you could put incremental
increases
maximum
in
rate,
per
maximum
year,
rate.
you go maybe a certain increase
That would be written
percentage
into
of
the
rate.
charter, or that would be adopted under the,
If it wasn't in the code, if it wasn't in the charter originally, you'd have to go back to the voters to ask them if they would approve it based upon the question that you would pose to them. So that would have to go back to the voters for a amendment to the home rule charter.
But it sounds like you're saying that the charter can designate some of those powers to council through their ability to adopt the administrative code or amend the administrative code.
It just depends on what it is you're asking. Again, because the charter is the basic framework, and lays out the general powers, and then the charter really gives meat and substance to it. But if you're asking for a new power or new authority, it has to first be stated in the charter through voter approval. But if the power is already stated in the charter, already implied in the charter, then really it's just an amendment to the administrative code. It really just depends.
So if we chose to alternate from the real estate end and switch it over into the earned income end, you're suggesting that would have to be voted on by referendum, or could not be done by the charter?
If it's not originally in the charter, and you wanted to have what's called revenue neutral tax increases, that probably would have to be written into the charter through a voter approved referendum.
Or initially, in the initial one.
It's not in there originally,
Sure.
because some charters did it that way,
Yeah.
where originally it wasn't in there, but voters asked the governing body through it, whether it was done by the governing body adopting an ordinance, placing it on the ballot, or through initiative petition, the voters asking the governing body, put it on the ballot, and we want to vote, yes or no, saying that if you want to raise the earned income tax, you've got to lower the real estate tax to some millage level to make it revenue neutral, at least in the first year. Because as you know, generally speaking, wages do go up marginally each year. So at least in the first year, make it revenue neutral, that whatever you increase in earned income, you're going to reduce in millage. So it's theoretically, it's revenue neutral. Because it wasn't in the charter originally.
One more question on the administrative code. I thought I read somewhere where only maybe one government study commission actually tried to take on writing of the administrative code. That's normally left for a transition commission, or?
Yes, a transition commission could write it, or the governing body, when they come on board in their first year, could create a committee. Once the Home Rule Charter takes effect, could create a body to do that, or the governing body could create a committee of itself, a whole or just a portion, to do the administrative code.
But once you, presumably, if you went with Home Rule Charter, that would take away the framework of the third-class city code, so there'd be a void there that needs to be filled by this administrative code.
That's all part of when you want this new charter to go into effect, the effective date. That's why maybe 6 months to a year, maybe. You got to think about that. What
Yeah.
time frame do you need, and how much lead time do you need to put the new organizational structure in place, so that you come out running, rather than kind of wanting and having a void, as you're saying.
But basically, as you explained, maybe you have some more to go through. The charter sets up the framework that the administrative code will be written from.
Correct, because the administrative code is the meat, the substance. It gives meaning and definition and direction and guidance to the language in the charter, which is really your framework, your skeleton, and basically just the basics, like the outline. Excellent questions.
Is there any law at the state level that restricts what you can or can't do in a home rule charter based on what's actually in the charter versus the administrative code? And I guess we've kind of talked about caps or increases or something like that. You inferred that if there was a cap, then you may or may not be able to do something else. Would it matter whether the cap's in the charter itself or whether the cap's in the administrative code?
The caps would have to be in the charter. And then maybe the administrative code could give definition to how you administer or implement that. But it has to be in the organic law. The charter is your organic law. That's another word for the home rule charter, the organic law. And we're going to get into the next screen or two about what you have to follow as soon as we finish the bullets on the historic reasons, about what you have to follow whether you're home rule or not. But with the flexibility, again, whether it's the taxation, about the rates or the rate caps, or certain incremental increases that you can go up to within a given year. But there's also with purchasing. Right now, you're tied to the threshold purchasing dollar amounts that all municipalities have to follow. But under home rule, you in your charter can give language to the fact that you're not tied to the municipal code from whence you come. And in the administrative code, it can give definition to tying it to maybe a rate of inflation like it is now, but not saying that you're tied to $18,900 like you are today for sealed competitive bidding, or $10,200 to $18,899 for the 3 informal price quotes like you are now. You could just say each year, or you could give an amount in your charter that it starts at $50,000. And then each year thereafter, you could say it's tied to the rate of inflation, and it would change up to 3% per year. That's determined by your city manager. So there's another element of flexibility there. Since you're not tied to your purchasing thresholds that you're tied to now. So that's another element of flexibility along with tax rates, as another example. Professional administration, you can institutionalize the position of manager, finance director, a personnel director, but right now it's created by ordinance, written into this third-class city optional plan as part of the plan that you have. When we talk about wider representation, but also with professional administration, you also institutionalize, a director of police, or you could even call it director of public safety. It institutionalizes it as part of the charter that gives greater definition in the administrative code of what the powers and duties and responsibilities of that position are. Director of Public Works, Director of Parks and Recreation, that is created in that framework of the charter, the organic law, but then it's spelled out more explicitly in the administrative code. So that's what you're talking about in professional administration. When we talk about wider representation, what are we talking about here? Right now, your council is elected by district, at large? At large. Now, you could have a combination under home rule, where you could have a certain number at large and a certain number by district. Or you could just make it all up, you could keep it all at large. It all depends on what your preference is. But it does provide for that flexibility also. Focused political leadership. Within the charter, it spells out who the presiding officer is, per se. You could have a elected executive council manager. The elected executive would be the focal point of the governing body, of the administration, of the city. It could be, so-called the chief elected executive. Or you can still keep the council manager and still have the mayor as that spokesperson for the municipality. The separate legislative and executive functions, where you would, I call it a firewall between the electeds and, what functions they perform with respect to who presents the budget, who presents ordinances, who presents policies and procedures, who presents the resolutions. And then the governing body certainly is the legislative body that acts, that makes the adoption, that takes the votes. You got the separation of powers, the checks and balances, in terms of the voting function and the executive function. What I also mean by that is that the governing body acts to vote. The executive is just that. They execute the policies that are adopted by the governing body. So you've got those that vote, and then you have those that implement or execute the policies that are adopted by the governing body. So you have that firewall. And that firewall should never be invaded or should never be crossed over, where the governing body technically should not micromanage the administrative departments. That's for the city manager, per se. So you have that separation of powers and duties. Merit hiring and advancement. Here, whether you want to call it civil service, whether you want to call it merit hiring, merit-based hiring, you put in place an objective professional development hiring system. Testing, evaluation, and it being done through the management and administrative apparatus within the city organization. And the governing body does the approvals. So again, you have that firewall, per se. Then we get into home rule limitations. And this goes back to what I talked about, where you have home rule about what's not prohibited. You can exercise that power or exercise that authority with the U.S., PA constitutions, or state laws. Then we get into specific restrictions Home Rule and Optional Plan Act, there are some restrictions, and we'll get into that. In fact, not may, must follow, just like regular municipalities must follow. These are laws that are uniform and applicable throughout the Commonwealth, regardless of whether you're home rule or not. I'm going to get into them in a second. Laws directed expressly at home rule governments. And we talked about the tax rates and special taxation. And the special taxation are those taxes that are levied against non-residents. And we talked about those also. And again, the charter itself can place limitations on the home rule charter itself. Okay, then we're getting into restrictions in state law.
I thought whenever you were mentioning in the opening statement, you also mentioned existing local ordinances.
Right, that the governing body has adopted that places restrictions on itself.
So anything you do in the charter can't undo something that's already been adopted
Correct.
in local ordinance.
Correct. I mean, the charter can give you the power to adopt ordinances that maybe place restrictions on yourself, but those ordinances can be amended or repealed if you so choose, because again, the charter gives you authority to do things. Again, you have the power to adopt an ethics policy, a conflict of interest policy, purchasing policies, but they may be amended. You may put a strict one in place, but sometimes they may want to be maybe loosened up a little, because you still have to follow the state ethics law. It's applicable to all municipalities, but some governing bodies want to put more restrictive conflict of interest policies and ethics policies in place because they have the ability to do that under home rule. So that's an example where the charter itself or the administrative code places more restrictive policies and procedures on the governing bodies and on employees that are in state law that are not applicable to other home rule municipalities that don't have those, or to the general class of municipalities that follow the municipal codes and follow the general state ethics law. So, you can tie it as tight as you want, or you can loosen it up based upon what powers the charter gives you and how tight you want to make it with respect to the ordinances you adopt for yourselves. So examples about restrictions in state law that you have to follow as a home rule municipality. Now this would be Act 111 arbitration law. It deals with binding arbitration for police and paid fire. You still have to follow that as a governing body, home rule. Labor relations for the non-uniform employees, Act 195. State labor relations law that deals with non-uniform employees. Boundary change law, you still have to, that's still applicable to home rule communities. The independence of municipalities. Again, just generally speaking, whatever state laws deal with that. And maybe one example would be you still have to follow the public safety code that deals with every governing body, every municipality still has to have an emergency management plan. You still have to have an emergency management coordinator. You still have to go through the training in order to receive state aid and federal aid from PEMA and FEMA. You still have to follow the election code, placing issues on the ballot, people running for office, follow the election code, but you would follow your charter in terms of how many people run and their election number of years. Sometimes you can put limits, term limits. Charters can place term limits on elected officials. You still have to follow the election code and how people run for office. The ethics law, it still applies whether you do or do not have a more restrictive ethics ordinance in play. Reapportionment. If by chance you would elect by district or a portion thereof, you still have to, after every census, go through a reapportionment to realign your districts if it's called for. The Sunshine Law, the Open Meetings Law, it's still applicable to a home rule community, just as the Open Records Law or the Right to Know Law is. You still have to have an open records officer. You got to go through the same period of time to respond. People still have the ability to appeal, etc. All these laws are still applicable to home rule communities. The local agency law, if an employee feels aggrieved, they have the ability to have a due process hearing, and they can appeal to a higher level court, to a common pleas court, etc. tort claims, that's the Political Subdivision Tort Claims Act, where local government officials would have immunity acting under the color of law, exercising their authority. The Unit Debt Act, the Local Government Unit Debt Act, you still have to get my department's approval when you incur debt. So that still is in play. And you still have to follow the approval requirements. But in your charter, if you borrow money, it may put a requirement on the governing body that it may require a referendum before you borrow so much. Where under the Local Government Unit Debt Act, there would be a referendum requirement, per se. See, there's electoral and there's a non-electoral debt under the Unit Debt Act. If it's electoral debt, it doesn't affect your debt limit. But under your home rule charter, if you have voter-approved debt, if you have referendum-approved debt, it would still go against your debt limit. But it's only because your home rule charter requires that you have voter approval if you're going to borrow so much money. Because your charter says so, not because the unit debt says so. It would still affect your debt limit. So there's a voter protection built in that you can have under home rule if you, the drafter, so choose as a safeguard. You know, in terms of maybe your debt limit going up so much, or that you're borrowing so much that you want the voters to approve it, because it would cause millage to go up. Or maybe have your earned income tax rate have to go up to pay or service the debt. These are just examples, food for thought. But you still have to follow the Unit Debt Act in terms of getting my department's approval and filing proceedings with my office if it's over a certain amount of money, etc. Taxation subjects. Home rule municipalities cannot create new subjects of taxation. They cannot go out and tax something new that other local governments cannot. You still can only tax that which the General Assembly allows all local governments to tax, which you're taxing now. All it allows for is higher rates on earned income, real estate, and the D-transfer tax. The taxes on residents. Court-appointed personnel, which maybe is more at the county level, for the judiciary. Veterans preference, you still have to follow that with respect to appointments of personnel. The Clean Streams Act, you still have to follow that. Sewage Facilities Act, still have to follow that. Stormwater Management Act, still have to follow that. There's no deviation from any of these, ladies and gentlemen. Next page, Recycling and Waste Reduction Act. Or you're getting a grant, I think, from that through the CAUD. Still have to follow that. The Vehicle Code, the Criminal Code. That doesn't change. The firearms and hunting rigs, that doesn't change. You cannot regulate the possession, the registration, and the use of firearms. That's a state jurisdiction. Private business limitations. You cannot regulate private business. What do I mean by that is, hypothetically, if you went into the asphalt manufacturing business, production business for yourself, you cannot go out and sell that to neighboring municipalities. That would be interference of the private enterprise activity. Pittsburgh tried to do that, they got their hands slapped. So, because they had an asphalt production plant at one time. And they tried selling it to neighboring communities, and the private sector went to court, and the judge said, Pittsburgh, you can't do that, you can't sell it to other communities. But you can produce it for yourself, so you can't regulate private business activity. You can't regulate utilities. PUC does that. Eminent domain regulations don't change. Local government autonomy, again, you can only exercise that which the home rule law gives you in terms of those powers that you exercise. Zoning, you still have to follow the municipality's planning code when it comes to zoning and permitted uses. And, the subdivision and land development ordinances still have to follow that as well. And then here's your flow chart in terms of your time frame. Maybe you're kind of in the second month. Well, now we're in July, so maybe the third month. So at this point, I would think that you're at a point where you've organized. You're probably beginning to think about, well, maybe we want to talk to the Altoona folks to start learning more in depth, with more breadth, far and wide about what their operation is all about and what they feel the strengths are and maybe what they think their deficiencies are. And then maybe in the next month or two, we want to reach out to home rule cities that have a council manager form of government and have a strong executive council manager form of government and get copies of their home rule charters and maybe have, maybe face-to-face interviews with a couple of those folks. Because as it says here, in the first half of this flow chart, where it talks about home rule commission, or home rule optional planning commission, that's the upper part that you really want to be interested in, which is the home rule commission part. I'd say by month 6, you really need to make a decision whether or not you want to keep what you have or move toward a home rule charter drafting process. Because by the end of the 9 month, you need to make a formal decision, which is a vote of the 7 members, either to change, which gives you an additional at least 9 months more, or no change. And if you get the additional 9 months, you're going to literally have to put together a draft charter. And plus you want to hold a public hearing within that first few months of the latter 9 months to hear from the public, maybe throw out some ideas of maybe some of the direction that you're going, or maybe want to hear from the public about what they like about their government now, what they'd like to see changed, and give some food for thought about, well, we think a council manager is this or that. We think a elected executive council manager form of government is this. This is an education process. This is an informational process, per se.
Mr. Farmer, could you suggest to us a town that you feel that the home rule charter has worked well in, one that we could reach out to that leader or persons?
Well, I have a little background just to convey this tonight about Johnstown, where they adopted, they were a third-class city. I don't have this part of the handout, so it's more just conversational. They were a third-class city, and then they went optional plan, strong mayor, council, form of government. And where they had an elected treasurer and controller. And then in '92 they went Act 47. And within that framework, where there were the optional plan, strong mayor, council, the mayor and council, from what I understand, they didn't operate efficiently together. It was a weak administration. It's not part of the handout.
Oh, I know.
I should have made it one.
They fought all the time.
I guess. They only had a city clerk. They didn't have a city manager under this, strong executive council form of government. And they're really in need of reorganization. So in '93, they adopted a home rule charter where it instituted a council manager form of government. They eliminated the controller and the treasurer as electeds. They have a 9-member council, including an elected mayor. And all the legislative powers vested in the council. And the mayor is an equal member of council, equal vote. And the mayor really is the presiding officer of the council in Johnstown. And the council really holds the power to appoint and remove all members of the boards and commissions and the committees, and appoints the manager, and removes the manager. And again, the mayor holds all the power, same power as the council members, presides over council like a council president, and is really the ceremonial head and the official representative of Johnstown. And the city manager is appointed by council, is the chief administrative officer, and is responsible to council. The manager is responsible to council. And the manager also appoints the finance director and appoints department heads with the consent of council. Taxes in Johnstown were initially, they were bound by the third-class city code, like you are now. But in 2002, by a charter amendment, 2002, the property tax and the earned income tax rates, those caps were lifted by charter amendment in 2002, after they went home rule in 93. Almost 9 years later, the charter was amended to lift the EIT and property tax rates in Johnstown, where they're uncapped. So they're no longer bound by the third-class city real estate rate and the Act 511 earned income tax rate.
It's been that way for more than a decade.
Pardon me?
It's been that way for more than a decade.
Yes, sir.
Does that mean that their charter included the caps when they, because you said they did the charter in 92?
The charter initially in 93, when it went into effect, when it was adopted in 92, had language in there that put caps on the real estate rate, that tied it to the third-class city code, which is 25 mills, 5 more mills for court approval, and it also had language in there that tied their earned income tax rate to the rate that was in effect at the time the charter was adopted, which was under Act 511 of 1965. But in 2002, the charter was amended to remove that language from the charter, to lift the caps.
As a matter of practice, another option is to have the home rule charter pick and choose parts of the third-class city code to leave in effect, and that's sort of what they did there with the taxes.
Yes, that's an option, but it tied the hands of council to provide flexibility to increase those rates to give them more revenue options.
Did it have to go to the voters in order to amend the charter?
Exactly.
Okay, so the
Exactly.
voters of Johnstown chose to eliminate the caps?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. You're exactly right. So that's Johnstown. And they're still in Act 47. They came in 93, I believe. Now we have the city of Nanticoke in Luzerne County. Also Act 47. And they are a pure third-class city. And they also have, 5-member council. They came into Act 47 in 2006. They basically confronted the same challenges of a third-class city. Lack clearly defined leadership, limited the city's taxing abilities, and the third-class city third-class city code no longer worked for them. So what do they have now under their home rule charter that was adopted a couple years ago? They adopted a strong mayor, council, manager form of government. It's called elected executive council manager form of government. That's what they have now. 5 members on council. They have term limits, and the council's solely responsible for legislative matters. The mayor is responsible for all executive matters and city operations. The mayor is. The mayor hires and appoints the city manager to work under the mayor, and the mayor is responsible for all administrative matters of the city, hand in hand with the manager. The mayor is part-time, term limited to 3 consecutive terms. The mayor's term limited, 3 consecutive terms. Budget and finance responsibilities. The mayor and city manager are responsible for the prep of the city's annual budget. The city shall not be able to increase revenues, which are taxes, fees, and regular income, by more than 8% above the preceding year. Let me repeat. Under budget and finance provisions in the city charter for Nanticoke, city of Nanticoke, the city shall not be able to increase revenues using taxes and fees and just regular income by more than 8% above the preceding year. That's what the charter says, 8%. You could say 10%, you could say 4%, you could just be silent in your charter. The administrative code is required adoption. The code will include in Nanticoke a code of ethics, a conflict of interest policy, a personnel policy, a purchasing policy, and a competitive bidding process. And like most charters, the citizens have the power to have initiative, a referendum, and recall, if and when recall is constitutionally permitted, because the PA Supreme Court, back in the 90s, said that recall is unconstitutional in Pennsylvania, because the power to remove elected officials is stated in Article 6 in the PA Constitution, which is through impeachment proceedings through the General Assembly and ultimately through the governor, or through conviction and sentencing by misbehavior, convicting through carrying out an infamous crime, where you're convicted and sentenced in a court of law, not recall.
Two questions. Okay, so my understanding is that Johnstown was a home rule charter before it went into Act 47. Is that correct?
No, no, they were an optional plan. They were a strong mayor, council, city clerk form of government in '93 when they went home rule, when they went into Act 47. One recommendation in their recovery plan was to look at home rule, just like Altoona's recovery plan is to examine home rule.
And it would be the same for Nanticoke?
Nanticoke went into Act 47 when they were a third-class city. A recommendation in their recovery plan was to examine the benefits of home rule. And they're still Act 47, but they became a home rule municipality.
How long have they been in Act 47?
Since 2007. Oh, Johnstown or Nanticoke?
Nanticoke.
Since 2007. Johnstown's been in since '93. In Act 47. So, you know, home rule is not a panacea for curing or confronting your fiscal challenges, but it can be an aid, and it can be a catalyst, and it can put into play a stronger and a more effective managerial and administrative structure, and I think a more conducive elected body in arranging for, you know, I guess a more full court press, if that's a word, or at least a more organized effort in working together to try to get over the goal line of, you know, trying to reach Altoona's goal of coming out of Act 47 within a 5-year period, if not sooner, ideally. You know?
Is there a more, does your office have a more complete list, the last page of the pamphlet, of the booklet here? Is there a more up-to-date list of the home rule? Because Nanticoke
I think
is
there's
on
about
this.
71 communities that are in, plus I think there's 1 or 2 more counties that came in.
Since this was listed
Yes.
published, is there also maybe a list of places where government study commissions were, you know, maybe in the last 10 years, put in place where it was a vote of no? I mean, that wouldn't show up here if they were in an option.
Correct.
And eventually, the commission voted no. That may be relevant for us to interview some of those.
I
So,
could try to get that information for you, yes.
yeah, I mean, just basically any community in probably the last 10 years where a government study commission was convened. I would assume some of those resulted in a home rule charter, and some of them presumably.
Yeah, we have to update that publication along with others.
Because you know, the communities listed here, I mean, most of them are in the 70s and 80s. That's the majority are. It's probably little relevant experience to the process.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often, but there are a few that are not
Well, there's a
listed.
flurry right after, I guess, in the 70s. Once
Right, when the law went into effect, it was Act 62 of 1972, based upon the 1968 Constitutional Convention that put into play, as the first page here in the PowerPoint. This was an excerpt out of the Article 9, Section 2 of the PA Constitution of 1968, that then home rule municipalities started looking at home rule once the 1972 Act was enacted.
And then also within this list, though, there would be some communities that are fairly mature down the road of being governed under home rule. Would be any information on what referendums have maybe come up over the 30 or so years to tweak their home rule charter? What types of things are typically seen that where they thought one way and it was had to be changed?
I have
The pitfalls of
I
what
have-
sounds good on paper and what.
read, going back several years, that we keep a record of in our department, that election offices are required to provide to us when home rule questions are on the ballot, asking that charters be amended. So I have a general excerpt from the question about what it is that's being asked of the voters to amend in the charter and whether it's passed or not.
Okay. That'd be good, because sometimes what people are looking to change is sometimes the most relevant.
You're right, you're right. Yeah, let me, so for all those municipalities that went home rule since our pub, and then those,
Types of referendum questions that,
those that did not go home rule those that did go home rule per referendum vote, you know, where it failed at the referendum, at the ballot box, right?
Well, you also.
or the commission voted in there. Just in general, which government state commissions have been formed in the last 10 years? Because the
I'll
government
try to
state
look-
commission either ended in a home rule, a no vote by the committee, or a failed referendum.
There's only two boys coming up here in the last 10 years.
Of the yeses. Of the-
They also looked at boundary change.
Oh, additional referendums.
All right, so it's a list that went home rule since our pub was last updated. And those that did not go home rule per referendum vote,
Or committees, or the commission, no, either
or
way.
and the commission voted no change.
Yeah. And the reason for the question is those are potential committees or commission members that we may want to try to interview that may still be in existence or remember why they did what they did.
Okay, Twin Cities. There's a couple that I think I know of in the last year. I'll try to go back 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, just
I
well,
think-
the sooner the better. I just don't know how big a pool you'll have.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back 10 years. I know I've got it for the last several years, because I do collect these, because I do talk about home rule a lot with different communities. I'll try to go back 10 years.
And then the last question there was just ballot referendums to amend home rule provisions of one sort or another. And the
Right.
thought there is the things that
Amendment
people
of
have amended
existing-
over the last 20 or 30 years tend to be the most relevant.
Amendment of existing home rule charters,
Yeah.
referendum questions.
This may not be something that you would be able to pull together yourself, but maybe you can point us in the right direction. I would like to see home rule charters that have eventually become financially solvent, where it seems to me with Johnstown and Unicode that the home rule charter didn't fix the problem.
You're not gonna have any.
They're ones that would come out, that was gonna be.
Well, I'm not suggesting maybe Act 47 necessarily, but are there any examples of home rule charters where they went in the red and came out?
They thought they were going towards Act 47 and maybe were able to become more financially solvent by heading it off by going to home rule charter.
Well,
Yeah, or that their financial stability has improved after they've gone to the home rule, I guess that's the word for it.
Because if you read our charter from 87, when they went to this form of government, the hope was to stave off this very.
Where we're at right
Yeah.
now, yeah. But it doesn't.
It may have delayed it.
Did, yeah.
May have delayed it significantly.
So again, yeah, financial stability improved because of adoption of a home rule charter.
Probably if we got to interview some of those folks and talk to them, that would be the question to ask them, they probably could answer that for us, you know, if they improved their financial situation.
You did mention that you've hosted events similar to this over the past recent years. Is there some resource people that have stuck out in your mind that really seem to speak well about the pros and cons and that of the process, you know, different commission members maybe have come along the way?
No commission members come to mind. Because, you know, what really happens here is that most of these either don't get to the ballot box or they vote for no change. I mean, they vote for no change or they're defeated at the ballot box.
In recent years, I mean, obviously there was a flurry in the 70s that did go ahead and get the whole way there, but
But there's, that's,
last decade, it's been.
I mean, I've got folders full of home rule charters that went to the ballot box and didn't pass. I mean, more don't pass than pass. And we're only talking, I think, a total of maybe 75, 76, 77, maybe 80 at the most, max, home rule municipalities in Pennsylvania today. And I'm including maybe 6 counties as well. Out of 2,562 local governments. A lot more have tried than have succeeded.
What would you attribute that to? Lack of communication or?
I think it's fear of change. I think that people would rather stick with what they know versus taking a leap of faith. And sometimes the charters propose a form of government that maybe is more reactive than progressive. And people are afraid to give power to their elected officials when they'd rather the power come from Harrisburg and from their own local elected cadre of people. But it boils down to, do you want to give yourself, the opportunity to control your own destiny through, your home rule charter and the powers that the home rule process gives you, or do you want to have, the municipal codes dictate what your powers are and the limitations that are drawn from those powers?
Or are you saying that you think it's more of the powers given to the elected officials than it is for financial reasons that voters vote these down?
I think voters sometimes don't understand the civics or the details of a proposed charter that's being put before them that they're being asked to vote on. And it really comes down to maybe that which they draw upon in their formative years in learning civics and government. That it's not something that they took with them when they became adults and maybe don't understand what local government's all about and what benefits can be derived from maybe having a home rule charter and controlling your own destiny and letting the voters be the ones that give the power to the elected officials rather than it coming from Harrisburg. A lot of this, I think, just comes with a lack of knowledge, and from the lack of knowledge comes, I think, a lack of trust and a lack of ability to involve themselves in government.
I really think that goes to Bob's question, which is communication. This is definitely going to fail, in my view, unless we work hard to make certain it's an open process that people understand. And I think, fortunately, that's the direction we started in. I think it plays a huge role, though, in having a chance for it to succeed. It's
Yes,
communication as
true.
well.
It is communication, you're right. But it provides an excellent opportunity to open the doors to build on what you have already, the successes that you have already with the existing form of government that is working. And you really just build upon that by looking at what's working now and maybe expanding upon that with respect to the administrative structure that's in place. And you're really not looking at really change that can be feared. It's really change that I think can be encouraged and seen as positive. I mean, the framework's already in place. You've already institutionalized, at least in the sense that you've had a city manager here for years. You have a finance director. You've got good department heads, very good qualified department heads. And it's taking it one step further by institutionalizing these in a charter rather than leaving it to an ordinance. So that's one difference between what you have now and what a charter can do. And then, putting meat to it in the administrative code.
So Altoona, different than maybe some of the communities, has already taken sort of maybe a step one towards, and the home rule would be a step two. Since we've already gone to the option plan, we're part way towards, as versus some other communities where if they were going to the city manager type setup, it would be a wholesale different
That's correct, because sometimes people fear the city manager who I think unknowingly people perceive that person as maybe having too much power, who's not elected. You know, who they think, you know, will wield power, you know, kind of, you know, in a rather arbitrary way, rather than leaving it to an elected official who they can elect and unelect every 4 years. You know, but the fact of the matter is that managers are accountable and answerable to the governing body. And managers are at will employees, whether you're an at will, whether you're a home rule charter community or not. And a lot of times people don't understand it. The department has at will employees too. And the general voting public maybe doesn't understand that. But again, you know, under home rule, you can take the best of what you have now and make it even better by, again, looking at the taxation issues, the purchasing issues, you know, and reducing the amount of spending on ordinances and streamlining the ordinance adoption process, opening up the budget adoption process for public hearings, the capital improvement planning process and having public hearings on that. You know, instituting a ethics policy, you know, conflict of interest policy. I mean, all these things, the opportunity is there.
Well, but I think it's important to stress that a lot of what, and I have a question coming from this, a lot of what's proposed going from third class city directly to home rule, a lot of it is already accomplished in Altoona.
Yes.
Do you think, in light of that, that might affect our timeline? In other words, we might not have as much comparatively to change in local study than we would if we were going directly from pure third-class city code to home rule.
Yes, I do believe that you have that advantage and it can streamline your study process and you can hone in on a recommendation sooner than later. Yes.
The question I have is as far as consultants or advisors. I mean, you mentioned a lot of areas where we have to check federal, state ordinances, laws, coordinate with that in the actual writing of a charter. What type of guidance do you see our commission needing for that? And is there any advantage to that person being on early on in the study process, or is that something that once we decide yes or no to move forward, you bring a person on then that can advise the commission on, you know, the nuts and bolts of writing a charter and where those boundaries are?
Well, one advantage that you can have is by looking at other city home rule charters and see how they're written and see what they have in them and see what they don't have in them. And most government study commissions cut and paste from other home rule charters. And they take what they like in other charters and put into their charter that which they feel works for them. So
And you say you have a book of those, or do we call the individual communities to get copies of?
you call the individual communities that you think, well, you
They model what we have in mind as far
yes,
as our structure of government.
So, Michael, if I could clarify something, your agency is not necessarily a clearinghouse or a database for home rule.
we are required to receive home rule charters when they're submitted as part of the final report and or adopted. Yes, we are. It's
So
part of the law.
you have them.
I know I've got a bunch, whether we have them in Harrisburg, that's
Do you
another
have,
matter.
Michael, do you have a web page that would have?
They're not on our webpage.
They're not.
Well, I guess that
See,
sort of
when we
stems around to my
moved-
question. Is
When we moved several years ago, they were, I'm not sure all of them made it to the new building. But I've got a bunch,
I guess that sort of goes to my question. Your department doesn't review our proposed home rule charter and critique it for compliance with laws. We would have to get a solicitor or
you really need a
somebody.
legal advisor for that.
That's me. So that person, our commission, should we choose to go that direction, would have to bring in that expertise at some point in time.
Yes, and I think every government study commission does that as part of their budget. They include some level of appropriation for legal services to review and comment on the proposed charter for, legal content and legal application.
Doesn't need to necessarily happen until after the decision is made to go that direction.
Correct.
The study and deliberation period, the commission can interview and make our decision, but if we
Yes.
choose to going forward with it, at that point, we would want to have some sort of third-party counsel.
Absolutely. You'll need that in order for the charter really to be able to stand on its own and to be a valid document and legally enforceable. And again, you really need to reach out to home rule municipalities and look at their charters and review them to see what you like in them. They're public documents. So, looking again at the PowerPoint, that there may be reference made to some of these restrictions in state law statutes. But basically, your charter provisions can't preempt what's already in state law that's generally applicable to all these, to all these statutes. You can't preempt it.
I think you're, where we are, I know in the timeline, we're at an hour and 20 right now.
Yeah.
But, and I think you're through the important page, which is the schedule, that some of us were trying to do that organized. The other things you want to address, or?
I just want you to, at your convenience, or maybe at another meeting, whether you ask me back or not, the more substantial narrative just takes you through the process and it talks about the final report, starting on page 10, which you'll get to at a later point in the process about what the content of the final report is. But you've got much to do before that. And again, I think once you get into looking at other charters, you'll get a better sense of what you want to put in your charter. And that almost becomes a cut and paste process. Then you begin to see kind of the formation of what your charter is going to look like should you choose to go that route, which I'm getting a sense that you probably do. And you'll begin to talk it out and deliberate over it and debate it and go through various drafts of it. And whether it's as a full committee of the whole, or you form a committee to look at different portions of the charter itself.
And then our charter can also dictate what that transition period is and how the administrative code is written.
Yes, in
Or
the
not.
final report, you would have an effective date of the charter, you would have the question in the final report, and you would also have the draft proposed home rule charter that you would submit to the city clerk, who would certify it within 5 days to the county election office. And the county election office would be advised when to place it on the ballot. But you certainly want to give enough lead time and transition time, but you also want public hearings, so that the public doesn't think that this is being done, even though these are sunshine law meetings, that you want to reach out to the public and as much as possible and get as much feedback and encourage their attendance and do publicity and newsletters and cable and newspaper and talk shows. And this has to be a grassroots effort. Got to get people engaged.
Any other questions from Mr. Foreman? Mr. Foreman, thank you very much. I know it was reasonably short notice, but you made a great effort to get here, and it's definitely worth our time. So,
Thank you very much.
I have your contact information too. I think you have Joyce.
I have your phone number, I may call you to get your email address to email you this information.
You can, you want to send it to me?
Get it from Linda, that way she can distribute
I
it.
have,
That's
my
okay.
email address is on this card.
Yeah.
Give this, please. Thanks.
Maybe you'll send me the minutes,
Sure.
that way I'll make sure I get all these requests down. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
The next agenda item is some discussion on scheduling public hearings, which is a better transition we could hope for, actually, out of the last few comments. The law requires us to have one public hearing as part of the process. But I know some individual discussions with some members who are the focus, I believe, clearly from the handouts we've received and the presentations we've had, is the importance early on of studying, asking a lot of questions, of doing a lot of reading and listening. And as part of that, I think it makes sense to have a public hearing in the very early stage to give an opportunity for citizens and groups to provide input on what is working, what is not working, what they would like to see changed if possible. So what I'm asking is for consideration of scheduling a public hearing within the next 30 days or so to begin getting that input as part of our study process and our learning process.
I think we go around the room. My preference would be that we have at least 1 to 2, if not more, meetings of interviews with various city government officials, so we can be a little more educated on city government and what they feel are the limitations of the third-class city code, so that we can be more informative than in our responses at the first public hearing. I'm sure you should have it as soon as we possibly can, but I think if we, for instance, did one next week, all we'd be able to do is reiterate these 2 presentations we've had in our last 2 meetings. We wouldn't have necessarily a lot of experience to counterbalance from the city officials.
I think that's, but what I'm suggesting is more as another avenue for us to hear as opposed to share expertise or thoughts. Just another opportunity for a better public, one with better publicity for the public in general to come. I think those department head meetings are crucial.
I think it's a good idea to have, open forums as long as we don't attempt to fix anything. In other words, we need to have it real clear right up front, regardless of who shows up, that we're not here right now to fix anything, we're here to listen.
Right.
Well, and I think that, when you do see some of the things on the public hearings, it may be advisable to start off with a presentation such as this flow chart, showing where we are in the process, and that there will be a future public hearing, if we want to commit to that, where we will be having discussion on how we fix things.
Yeah.
At this point, it's looking for more
I'm just looking for
input on
opinion.
where changes.
I think there's questions that we can get from the public about what we should be directing questions to the department heads about. I mean, if there's concerns out there in the public, we're representing them, and so in a sense, I think we need to make sure, I think that's probably what you're saying. Yeah, we need to make sure that we are representing the public and to make sure they understand that we're representing them. And the questions that we may pose to the department heads or to other people from these other municipalities about when they come talk to us about what happened when they went home rule. I think we need to know that so that we're asking the right questions, and so that, because I think the concern is, and I'm a little bit surprised, I guess I'm not really surprised, that the vast number of these get voted down. And if we were going to make that recommendation, we certainly wouldn't want it to be voted down. I mean, that's kind of inherent to making the recommendation. So we want to head that off as quick as we can, if that's going to be the route we go.
Yeah, I sort of envision maybe 2 revision cycles where
Oh, sure.
department heads, public hearing, maybe some department heads and other interviews.
And I think the other thing that I want to comment on is that I see the public hearing too as opportunities for not necessarily department heads, but groups closely affiliated with the city to come in and speak as part of the public hearings, not, save our meetings for the department heads, but, it strikes me, Eric Wolf at Amtrak, Mike Hofer from, Park and Rec, that isn't a direct, department head, but clearly organizations that are heavily impacted by city operation that might be able to give us some guidance and feedback that we wouldn't get purely in talking to department heads alone.
I think we ought to do as much as we can to make it a transparent and public process. I also think, based on what I've read, we're going to be disappointed in who shows up. I have
Not
read.
necessarily. I think we can make certain Eric's there, or.
Oh, no, I meant the general public.
Well,
Okay,
yeah,
and
we've got to give them the opportunity, but if we're gonna do it, I think we make certainly stable testimony.
And I think when we do that, we need to clearly establish both the content and guidelines of what it is that we're attempting to do. That we're not there to fix anything, we're there to hear so that we can study and make a recommendation.
I think, I guess, to that, we're gonna keep our regular, we obviously advertise our regular schedule here. This public hearing, which we'll have to advertise, we need to pick a date for that, presumably today or in the near future, and then leave some time on future agendas to discuss and set that agenda.
Or I checked with this with Larry.
Okay.
We could use one of the dates we.
You can do it an hour beforehand.
Or just use that.
We'll have to publish.
Or you can use the date,
Yeah, you can use that date.
either or.
Well,
We'll have
do
to
you-
publish a location change, or we don't?
Only for the public hearing.
For the, no, we could just say, pick a date, our second Tuesday, the third Tuesday in August, which we've already picked for a meeting. We could say that we're gonna use that meeting as a public hearing.
Exactly.
Okay, and we also, according to 2920, may hold private hearings and sponsor public forums. Now, do they have to be advertised?
We're gonna have to talk to Larry.
Private hearing doesn't sound like it's a.
But if we're all meeting, I'd say there is no such thing.
Yeah, I think I'll defer to Larry, because I'm not getting.
The way he explained it, an executive session would be voted upon by the body, and then we would do that. That'd be your private hearing. That's the only private thing we could possibly do is go into executive session, correct?
You have to have specific reasons to go into an executive session.
I think at our first meeting, Larry basically said he couldn't foresee any of the specific criteria being in the reasons for.
It's not personnel, it's not property, sale, it's not litigation.
Mr. Chairman, where do you envision these public hearings taking place?
Nice room right there.
I honestly don't think it will get anyone to come here. I think that we have to go to them. I think outside, perhaps. I know the planning commission had a lot of success with different meetings at Mansion Park. In my mind, I'm thinking Heritage Plaza right before a downtown event or something like that.
I don't think that, I don't wanna, that doesn't, the public hearings through different bodies I've been involved with over the years are opportunities to come before a body and make a presentation. I don't know that an outside meeting would fly or something like that.
That'd be a little tough to have.
Yeah, well, the reality is I think we're looking for as much input as possible, and it's up to us to publicize it, but also to make certain we're identifying groups that might have an interest that otherwise might not come forward. And I just, off the top of my head, came up with one or two. I'm sure we can all brainstorm and have a list of 4 or 5. Some of them may be willing to come and say, I wasn't trying Eric under the bus there, so to speak.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's good.
I do think that I'm not sure that this location would suit us. I'm thinking back to when we adopted the new planning code, 10 years ago or something like that. And the public hearings for that is over at the Discovery Center.
Right.
And I seem to recall, I don't recall a lot of people coming. I really don't remember all that well, but I seem to recall there were a lot of people there. Certainly more than could possibly fit here.
Well, that's fine.
And,
We have the Penn State facilities too, we might use one of those.
the theater downtown would be an excellent location. I'm sure they would let us use that.
I was thinking theater downtown would be the best location if we think we'll get the size crowd that would want it.
Mhm.
But
Well, and even if we don't, it's still,
Is this
You
for
know.
the general public, not subsets? Okay. An advertised meeting for the general public in the auditorium.
Yeah, it would be the public hearing. I would urge us to try and schedule testimony as well. But- So, do we want to move this forward, pick a date? Do we want to use the second meeting in August?
You know, I don't think we're gonna have enough meetings to do this. I think
If we
we're.
have to advertise anyhow, I don't know, we wouldn't pick another
Pick
day.
another one? Okay.
No, well, no, I'm thinking right now, based on what I've heard, the complexity of it, I'm like boggled right now as to how we're ever gonna be able to do this, because as we talk about who to invite, okay, the general public, and then, you know, is somebody gonna do a stakeholder analysis to identify the subgroups of the general public that we should have separate get-togethers with? It's like, you know, it's very complex in my mind. And one of my goals is to be an open and transparent as is possible, and to get as much feedback as possible. I mean, we should be talking to business groups, and maybe, you know, club groups or something like that in addition.
Well, but I think that's why the hearings.
You're suggesting inviting those groups to do the
what
public
about a
hearing.
public hearing actually?
No, that's
Yeah,
what you're
yeah.
suggesting.
We always
Yeah.
have to, because we can't go to them as any more
Yeah.
than three of us. I mean,
Right.
three of us could go
Exactly.
to attend,
Can-
you
can
can
we-
have with the Sunshine Law, we can't go to those groups as a whole group, only three of us. at a
Well,
time.
then I would not be adverse to divvying it up. 3 here, 3 there.
Can we co-opt someone's meeting for a public meeting? And I'm thinking specifically like the Breakfast Club.
I
mean, we'd
the
have to- we'd
idea,
have to check with
the
them,
idea is to
obviously.
keep it open for the public. I mean, I
Well, that
really, I
would be
really
for
think if
stakeholders.
we identify some stakeholders, invite them, try and get it scheduled, let them know. And you might be right, Dave. You know, like I said, I threw out 2 real fast. You came up with 1. I thought of 2 more. You know, we might want to schedule 3 hearings just to encourage folks like that, but to show up. So maybe the idea is identify stakeholders, figure out how many public hearings we need to try and get them at least the opportunity to show up. They may not all take it.
You know, that, and to your breakfast club idea, I think that maybe one of us could speak there and encourage participation at the public hearing in those forums, or any other organizations that you belong to promote the involvement.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much we can officially do, because we have to follow all these sunshine.
Well, I think absolutely each of us in groups that we are involved with, we need to be encouraging all those to come to these public meetings.
My experience in public meetings is that when people come to public meetings, they're expecting to hear something from you about what you're doing and what direction you're going, rather than you looking for them for feedback.
It'll be real quiet.
Yeah.
They're gonna wanna know, what are you doing, and what do you want from us?
And that's what, yeah, that's what
Well,
sort
and I
of.
think we'll get there eventually, but I think also I read somewhere where there was a suggestion to have public hearings during the discovery phase to get input the other direction.
I think we probably need to be prepared to do like a half-hour presentation, to at least make it a worthwhile meeting, and then open it up for hopefully what we're there for is the interaction back from them.
You have to have a tight agenda.
Yeah, and I think if we publish for a public meeting, we should perhaps establish public hearing. What our expectations might be and what we're gonna do, so that people have a clear understanding of why we would want them to come, and what our expectations of them might be, and what their expectations of us could be.
Because I foresee a half-hour sort of, in a nutshell, for the general public, summation of these last 2 meetings of what our charter is, and educate, it was on the ballot, it was just a short question, and obviously got voted yes to be here, but I don't know that the general public knows that much about what we're actually.
No, and they might say, we voted you to do it, so, go do it. And I would agree with what you said, they're gonna expect us to tell them something.
Eventually, but I think that process changes. At the beginning, the structure in the manual we have talks about the 3-stage process of study, deliberation, and draft. I'm just saying during the study phase, we need to be as open as possible for us to be listening. So maybe we're 10 minutes at the beginning. As we go through the process to the final hearing, we would be saying, well, here's how far we are, now we want to hear input on
Yeah,
that.
I'm okay with all of that, even if we look like we have no idea what we're doing. We could pretty much say that. We don't know what we're doing. Tell us what you want.
Bob, what, in '87, what did you guys do? In '87?
We didn't have public hearings. Actually, public hearing. We did all the studying behind closed doors, and we came up with a,
That's how we got to where we are.
that's what we did.
So, I guess I'm back to trying to look at the clock and say we've got 20 minutes left for Duncan tears into me for violating my pledge. But,
Yeah, I think the first meeting is just basically listening and whether or not people come and share their thoughts or not, but I don't think we're in any position to have dialogue. And I don't think, you know, at this point, it really wouldn't do justice to the study if we had any kind of dialogue. So I think maybe 10 minutes if you wanted to do something like that, just to lay the ground rules and to review, you know, quickly why we exist, what our purpose is, and that type of thing, and then,
we're just putting the word out to organizations,
yeah, we can do
stakeholders,
that.
saying, here's
that's a
here's
good
the
idea.
first opportunity,
Right.
get a hold of us, and we're gonna have a 2-hour hearing. We'll fill up time slots and give people 20 minutes at a time to come and express their thoughts,
And then I think it's incumbent upon us to identify the stakeholders
and get them there.
and get us out there and do that.
Yeah.
So therein lies my concern about our number of meetings. If we're only going to meet once a month, I don't know how we're going to do
Yeah,
this.
we have
meeting
two.
twice.
Yeah,
I'm
we
sorry,
have
twice a month?
Yeah.
And I think the third Tuesday, the 20th of August, would be the appropriate time to try this. That gives us another 2 meetings before we meet again,
And
and we can pretty well hone our craft by then.
I
next meeting.
think like Dave's idea of splitting us up, possibly we can have 2 different meetings on the same night in 2 different locations to try and encourage more people to come.
No, I think we need to, if we're,
You're gonna have a public hearing, you better have everybody there.
yeah,
You better have the commission there. If it's gonna be public, they're all.
well, the point is, we're all to be studying and listening, and the first part of this is the study. We all need to be hearing the same stuff.
What I've read that they did in Allegheny County, where you have a much larger, the whole county, they do a bunch of local, we're talking a kind of small geographic region
Right.
here. But we do it downtown, that's where all the buses come, and it's very accessible to the public.
I think if we can look into getting the Discovery Center or Penn State for that third Tuesday, I think, I like your idea of that. The only thing we'd have to do then would be to change the advertisement for that meeting to that point.
Right.
And then in the meantime, should we be looking to meet with some of the department heads, so we're all
Yeah,
already
exactly.
moving on that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, why don't we ask Linda, and I'll coordinate this with Joe to identify I'm sorry, you said August what?
August 20th.
20,
That's a 6 o'clock start.
August 20, that gives, 9 by 8. August 20th at 6. They will be our first public hearing. The charge then on all of us will be to reach out to different stakeholder groups who may want, I suggested 20-minute segments to give us input, but that can vary depending on how many come forward. And to schedule them into that meeting so that we can learn as much as we can from the stakeholders. So, do I have a motion, first public hearing will be August 20th at 6 at a site to be determined, hopefully the Penn State Conference Center. Discovery Center.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, what did you say about 20 minutes?
I didn't make that necessarily part of the motion. What I'm saying is, our task would be to reach out to stakeholders, have them contact us or.
To come to the
Joe,
public meeting
to say,
prepared
hey, I
to
wanna
talk
be there.
for a given length
So
of
we
time.
can know, hey, we have 6 groups, we have 3 groups, we have 4 groups. And we might be able, if we have 10 groups, we might realize we can schedule a second meeting.
There goes 8 o'clock.
Will there be
You just reduce the time.
reserved just for the general public to ask questions other than these
Absolutely,
groups
yeah,
and things?
yeah. I think the risk is if you have the meeting and you don't have anything scheduled, you might have 3 people show up who may or may not have 5 minutes to say anything, so I'm just trying to maximize the input of the effective public meeting and maximize the communication.
Sounds good.
Any further discussion on the motion? Then, calling the motion, all in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
Now, will we as a group identify stakeholders and divvy them up, or how shall we do that?
I don't know if we have to divvy them up, we can
Let's
start
start
reaching,
with
well, yeah, start
Refer them to
reaching
the
out.
chair.
That's fine.
Have courtesy of the chair and refer them to him.
How will we identify stakeholder groups?
I think based on our knowledge of the community and who we think.
Okay, and just as a matter of, will we do that next meeting, or how shall we do that?
I think that's an ongoing process between now and then.
Okay.
Let's see, structured approach to the commission, item 10. This came about, I've had a couple discussions with Mr. Duncan on sort of the analysis process that the commission has to engage in, and making certain we're clear that we're sort of covering as many bases as possible and being as efficient as possible to avoid unorganized meetings and sort of, I think you said, a stream of consciousness approach. I thought that was great. Yeah. Along those lines, I was going to just ask if Dave, if you would be willing to try and put pen to paper. I told you that I've done a chunk of this to try and come up with a recommended process. And you can sort of reach out to every member one at a time, whatever you need to do, and maybe get back to us and say, here's my thought on the process where we can follow to try and put as much organization structure in this as possible. I think Richard, you had said something to that effect too, about the need to make certain we're organized and not having.
Yeah, well, I also think that we're gonna need to, because we do have a limited amount of time, I think we wanna try to figure out if there's some things that we can narrow down on what we're really studying. And I think we've kind of already done that today in terms of the form of government, the idea of strong mayor, weak mayor, that kind of idea, that maybe we don't want to use all that much time studying that aspect of home rule compared to all the other aspects. So I think we want to study everything that you can do or undo or whatever in home rule. I think we're going to use a lot of time studying things that I don't think anyone here wants to do, or that anybody in the city would really want to be doing anyway. Moving us backwards. So I think the more we can identify those things, the more streamlined it's going to be down the road, because that just gives us some focus as to what we're actually studying.
You willing to take the point on this, Dave?
I am assuming I can work at least individually. I know more than three of us
Yeah,
can't
right.
get together. But I think it needs to be a document that is a composite document from all 7 members. I'd be happy to do that.
And maybe you think you can have something back in a few weeks on the next meeting?
I certainly do.
Fantastic. Is everyone else okay with that?
Do you mind if I use graphics like the fishbone diagram?
That'd be great.
I know this was diagram in Michael's presentation. By the way, do you have decision trees available? You know, like, if you do this, here's what happens, and it's a no-go from there, to get down here.
Nothing more than a flow chart.
We're gonna come up with something like that, and I think that, that'll be good for everybody else.
Establish agenda for next meeting. I think I'm hearing that we need to start with the department head, or
I would recommend possibly, now whether they can come here or not, the reason we're here is because city council and the mayor voted to put this on the ballot for some reason, apparently, possibly at the recommendation Act 47. Should we start where it started and invite city council and the mayor in? Is that too many people to invite at one time? And then, I obviously probably want to hear from the city manager and maybe, I don't know which department heads at the next meeting, we probably want to hear from both those groups in the next 2 meetings. I don't know if the order is necessary.
don't know, I mean, as a former mayor, I'm not sure if that would be their role or not, but I'd never mind, it never bothered me to invite them.
Yeah, I just didn't know if, they obviously had a reasoning in mind and wanted some sort of flexibility, like, you know, if we had home rule charter, this is what I wish it was.
Well, the two that really spearheaded it were Dave Luterbaugh and Bill Shirk. They're the ones that went out and publicly really, got behind this and asked everybody to try to consider it. So if you're looking for two suggestions, there's two right there.
Well, I think my thought would be we go to Joe and say, in addition to department heads, we've had a suggestion, we wouldn't mind hearing a presentation if they're wanting to do it, from maybe the mayor or council, or they can delegate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really care the order, I mean, I think it probably comes with.
So, but I think it's smart to give them an opportunity,
Sure.
whether it's all settled or they may say, they may vote as a body, hey, you two go do this, or. Right.
I think it's a good idea, pardon me, but I would be interested in knowing what, in other words, if I were Joe, I would say, well, why are you asking me that? What is it that you want me to tell you?
And I think our direction is specifically, as it relates to third-class city code and the option plan, what do you feel the limitations under this form of government are? And what do you hope to accomplish if you convince us to place a home rule charter on the ballot?
Okay, I think whoever invites them should be pretty clear what our expectations are. We're not gonna fix anything, we're not looking to impugn anybody or anything like that. It's, I don't know what the words are, but we're just asking them to come to talk to us.
Probably would be good to have like maybe 2 or 3 specific questions and then say
Yeah,
these are and then give them each a time, like a 10-minute time frame or something, so they have an idea, some guidance on how long,
It's almost like you need a scripted narrative that says whatever it is that we're looking for, so that each and every individual hears the same message.
Yeah, I think, like you're saying, here's the main point of us bringing you into this group, sort of the question I just stated. You give us 10 minutes uninterrupted on, how you feel about home rule charter and how you feel it could improve your specific area of governing within the city, and then another 5 minutes or so, or however long, deemed by however many guests we have, of open question and answer.
But I think in what you just said, Richard, you're making the assumption they're in favor of home rule charter.
Or tell us not.
Okay.
I mean, I'm saying, what are the limitations of third-class city code? How do you see your governing of whatever, if the department or council or whatever, how could that be improved through home rule charter? Or I guess you can leave that as the flip side of, you think it's fine and tell us why you think
What do
it's
they
fine.
consider the limitations? And I think we're gonna have to rely on Joe to make certain, because some of the department heads may or may not know what they can
Yeah,
do on
that's
their own.
true.
But that's why I think, I'm still saying we go to Joe and have him
Yeah,
coordinate all of those as to,
Well,
whether
I think-
council and the mayor wanna come and.
I think specifically
and
also
department heads.
Joe is one of the people that we would be
Sure.
interviewing since he's
yeah.
drastically affected by it and up to speed to some degree on it.
And it's gonna take more than, I think probably the second meeting in July and the first meeting in August will allow us to get a large chunk of that, and maybe not all of it. That's probably.
Well, I think,
we should make some good progress then. It's gonna need-
hopefully, we can work with Joe between council and department heads to fill up the next 2 meetings. Have our public meeting. At some point during that, we'll make a decision after the public meeting, do we start interviewing people from other municipalities, or is there more work to be done
Right.
interviewing people within the city?
And just as a matter of interest, how about the workers, not the leaders, the workers in city government?
Well, I think it's
Maybe
gonna
the
come
ones
down
that asked
to.
the public hearing.
Public hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, one of my fears would be that, obviously, it's a public meeting and they wouldn't want to necessarily upset their boss.
That's
Or
good.
something about that.
Meaning like the department head may not want to say that there's this problem. I mean, for me, you said, well, what are we looking for? For me, it's identify. It's identify what problems we have so that we can figure out whether or not we can fix those.
Well, and I don't think they're there to complain about their boss per se, they would be there, talk about.
It might be.
Well, but in terms of our role, what we're looking at here is the systemic limitations that we're under, and then I guess, what suggestions they would have for change, and then we have to decide whether home rule would help them with that. I don't think we can expect them to know that home rule will be the fix, but it's, here's our limitations. If they just tell us that, then it's up to us to analyze whether home rule might solve or help on some of those limitations.
As far as my understanding, there's no limitation on us individually setting up and interviewing, gaining as much knowledge on your own by setting up and interviewing various officials, workers, whatever level, to form your own opinion of this and maybe portray that opinion to the group in the meetings, but there's no limitation to us meeting officials on our own.
There may not, Richard, be limitation, but if we were to do that, I would think it would be, since we're to work together as a team, an organized effort. That was my reference to divvying things up. So rather than you going out and just, unilaterally having meetings with certain people or certain groups and then coming back and reporting, it would be good, I think, if we knew that so that perhaps we don't overlap or that we...
I think that both approaches, because, your agenda for interviewing somebody may be different than mine. I think that, in general, we're all in the information stage and we can maybe keep it all at an informational level, but, I think nothing to conclude.
I'll just go back to the idea of organizing. If there is a constituency out there and there's stakeholders in it, it would be good for this group to know, in my mind, who are the stakeholders, and if we want to talk to each and every one of them, we've got 7 of us around the table, just divvy it up. That's just,
I think we have established agendas for the next 2 meetings, probably. They need fleshed out, that we see the direction of it. We've got 4 minutes. Request to council for approval of the $2,050 budget. We discussed that last time. I don't know that we ever voted to just make that formal request, keeping in mind that this is just for the balance of this year to get us through a lot of this discovery process.
I think we were waiting to see if I was gonna cover our admin costs and so forth, so we're good with all that.
so moved.
Well, in the advertising, those sorts of things, at this point, we're understanding the city's going to provide us, not within this budget. So if we have to advertise this additional meeting, they're going to do that for us.
Yeah, well, we can just ask Joe that, or nothing keeps us from going back to amend that if we need some more. I just think I want to see probably a guideline of
Well,
where
they
this is
obviously did the first advertisement for this meeting in the series without it being within this budget, so it's our assumption that
I think
we'll
really
try to
it's
minimize that, but we have.
a matter of courtesy to see what this is ultimately going to cost versus, is there another zero at the end of this? They might have a bigger problem.
There's nothing to prevent us from raising money outside the city government either.
Grants or,
And as long as we keep track of it and when it goes for
well, and,
sources.
careful how we structure those. Right now, we're not spending
We're not.
We have zero. They're just,
Spending
we're
our
making
cash.
this request to spend that on their behalf.
So I made a motion that we do that budget.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that request will go to council, and I assume you can do it.
Yes.
Additional public comment, we only have a couple minutes. I'm sure media questions can go one-on-one discussion.
Just one question, Michael. You said Johnstown went on Act 47 in 1992, roughly, and they went on home rule in 93.
No.
Is that what I heard?
2002.
Well, that was Nantucket.
Johnstown went Act 47, I think, in 1993. They went Act 47 in 1993. They went home rule in 2000.
It doesn't matter. Why are they still on Act 47 if they went to home rule?
They finalized.
They're still in Act 47 because they really haven't met the conditions yet to come out of Act 47. They haven't addressed the conditions that brought them in yet.
it almost sounds like it's easier to stay on Act 47 once you're on it, by what I'm
You
reading.
know, it's a long-term process to, alleviate the conditions.
That's all I have.
The charter was adopted in '93.
Okay.
Very good, then, Bill, I'm sure if you want questions, you can get individual people.
Would you mind if I ask one quick question? I don't know if somebody wants to
Go ahead.
an answer, actually, but just maybe food for thought. It seems to me, and maybe I'm dumb, okay, that's, I believe that possible, that I haven't heard a real clear explanation of the reason for home rule in terms of laying out a few really important things versus the things that are sort of peripheral. Because when I hear the explanation of it, it sounds like if you put it in terms of, hey, you can do anything except what's prohibited. Well, a whole lot of things are prohibited. And it's really not clear to me what you really can do. And then when you get into the things of what you really can do, there's a whole lot of weeds. It's like little tiny things, maybe how important they are, it's really unclear. And it seems to me that you may end up wanting to do this for a couple of things, like maybe lifting the caps off taxes. And beyond that, I fail to see anything like super important that you need to do. And that's just like...
Well, I guess the swift answer is that's why we're studying the process the way we are. We may uncover more important things than the obvious you state. We may not.
Although I would point out in your PowerPoint, improved accountability, improved fiscal procedures, flexibility, professional administration, wider representation, focused political leadership. These might not be as tangible, but I think they make a big difference when you're trying to run a complex organization.
And it might also go to the point, that's an excellent point here, but it also might go to the point that a lot of this change has already happened in Altoona.
Yeah.
This is just a chance to
Tweaking.
tweak it, correct. But we'll find out, we're not in a position to answer that, so.
I think Michael actually referred to one of them, which was a pretty good reason, I mean, not a reason of its own, but this cost thing, that there was a floor or ceiling, whatever, on what you could purchase before doing the sealed bids, because that's codified in third-class city code, and we could change that to something a lot more rational that's inflation adjusted. You know, and actually, I've been perusing the third-class city code, and I've seen a lot of things that are like that, where there's just things that are set, it made sense to set it back 30, 40 years ago, and they've never changed since then. The way that things change, and that today you just wouldn't do that.
I mean, obviously, you have to keep an open mind about it. One of the things that interests me is the idea that you could mandate that there be representatives from each ward. That's something that we used to do in 1987. Now we're elected at large, so we're not seeing representatives from, say, for example, my home ward, 7th Ward. The other thing that I would love to see, and since this isn't, we can't get reelected here, I'm allowed to say it, would be mandating reassessment. I would love to see that.
We have a lot to study, and we're still learning. We are also adjourned.
The meeting is chairperson.
They don't have weed, huh?
Yeah, this is digital.
That would help get us the hell out of there.
Yeah, but remember, they went into home rule charter.
I'll just scan it in and put it on that.
But the reason I see, I mean, like, the terms, they didn't have enough funds. So if you have it on neutral, then you don't get the money. No, I'm not gonna do Because Altoona has this cap that was not meant to be a place for a revenue system.
fact, in
60 years old.
yeah, 58
I get a picture of you
Right.
muckraking at our event.
Muckraking at Ford.
Oh, yeah, I sent you that email. Oh, you did? For July 5th.
Yeah, up at the hospital. I got sent pictures. I'm exaggerating. That's during the Civil War.
Okay, I might be able to offer. It might be because it's first thing in the morning. Yeah, I'll send it to you. But I thought I called you. Because I was thinking I saw something
The
about.
city does its own
Yeah, I know,
assessment.
I
The city has the option.
But he said, so it's a go.
So it's not
He told me,
mandated.
go ahead and he would respond to my.
No, most places do, because you don't.
Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome.
And
That's who needs to talk to me before you talk to Joe, or you can
So the
take
city has
this
not much
message
to
to
do.
him.
I'll think about
In
it.
large cities,
Yeah,
they
then I
have
can
money,
call
they
you.
do their own.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Chief, how you doing?
And, or have.
So it really is that the city can do its own research.
If they have money to pay for it, because the county wouldn't pay for it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Why would they?
Yeah, sure.
It's expensive as ever, and you'd have to pretty much do your own property assessment process, system. You have to have it in your own. And updating it every 3 years can be expensive too.
Well, the 3 years is because of the city code, so if you're going somewhere else, it may not have to be done.
Yeah, it would be a triennial assessment.
We're not.
If you did your own property assessment process, it's called a triennial assessment, where you're updating it every 3 years. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, but if it's not, but we're not in the 35 city code, or is it somewhere else stated that even if your home rule has to be triennial?
No, if your home rule, the county, see, that's another one that maybe isn't in the PowerPoint, that the county still reserves the right